Good afternoon, folks. Well, here today we have a little tale of merry old England and the deep state. So we'll just begin with a little poem. With eyed tales this fills our empty ears. The next reports from what the first he hears. The rolling fictions grow in strength and size, each author adding to the former lies. Here vain credulity, with new desires, leads us astray and groundless joy inspires. The dubious whispers, tumults fresh designed, and chilling fears astound the anxious mind. Well, isn't that exactly where we are right now, today, under this barrage of deceptions and lies and fantasies pouring out of the television from childcare Westminster? So this is an interesting body of data, and it's going back to the 1700s. Of course, this is when the Venetians, the Hanoverians, took root in our merry England. And so it's titled Jonathan Swift and the Battle for Britain's Soul. It says, on November the 9th, 1710, the satirist and political organiser Jonathan Swift wrote a pamphlet called The Art of Political Lying, providing a decisive blow against the proto-deep state of the 18th century, which had only recently taken control of the island, the British Isles, during the 1688 Glorious Revolution and 1694 creation of the Bank of England. In 1702, a young Queen Anne took to the throne of England, and it was here that a clash occurred which was nearly entirely written out of history. From the moment the Venetian party of England orchestrated the 1688 coup wars, speculation and usury became the driving force of Britain. The long-hoped-for peace with France, organised by the great Colbert and his mentor Cardinal Jules Mazarin years earlier, was lost, and a new epoch of forever wars began to dominate British foreign policy and British spending. So you'll notice there Cardinal and Colbert were the saviours or bringing peace to England and France, which was about to be usurped because, of course, the Bank of England, in order for it to force governments to borrow, had to have reason for such. And war is the policy and the driving force behind the Venetians, as it has always been so. It was in this new war economy that the bill to charter the Bank of England was passed. See, central banking's war, they're one and the same. Under this bank, monetary policy became tied to the creation of ever-growing debts without providing the means to pay them off. While many informed citizens today may be aware of this fact and even comprehend the parallels to the takeover of the United States by international financiers during the 1913 creation of the Federal Reserve, very few people have come to realise that there was a valiant fight in opposition to this 17th-18th century coup from which could teach us much of what we organise and what is organising the world today. So the Republican resistance, in opposition to the City of London-based deep state, an anti-imperial faction had organised around Speaker of the House of Commons Robert Harley, and he was around 1661-1724, who worked closely with an influential network of collaborators who did much to resist the empire, which had not yet consolidated its migration from the swamps of Venice to more secure grounds in the City of London. So, you see, empire isn't England, and when it does migrate over here, it goes into the inner city of London, right? So we're looking here at the moves of empire against England. Harley had worked closely with his advisor Daniel Defoe and other Tories to counter the monstrous Central Bank of England with the National Land Bank in 1696. So note the term Tory there. The Tories then were classed as, it was a nickname for Catholic bandits. Alright, so they were classed as bandits. These cardinals, the Catholic, the church people, the Christians were classed as bandits. Alright, and it was they that were opposing the Venetians' empire okay? And we forget this. We forget this about merry old England. Yes, it went Protestant, but before the Reformation, everybody in the entire European landmass was classed as of the church. So you can see here where the dividing role is. They've taken over the Vatican system and presented it as the cause. No, the Holy See, the families at the Holy See, they are the power of Rome. The Vatican being only an instrument. The City of London became an instrument of the Holy See via the work of its Templars, its Jesuits. Yeah, it's the Holy See has undermined the church system through the secret societies, the Knights Orders, specifically the Jesuits, previous to that the Templars. And of course the Renaissance enabled the shift from Templar to Jesuit as a different format in the eyes of the populations. So I'll do that again. Oily had worked closely with his advisor Daniel Defoe and other Tories to counter the monstrous Central Bank of England with the National Land Bank in 1696, a land bank. Can you see that this, you see, we think we've evolved, we've devolved, we don't even understand our own language. You can see the language being used here as a clear demarcation between land and the imperial. Imperial is of the sea. Everything that was created in nation is of the land. Yeah, the ports were the demarcation areas where the sea and the land intermingled, you know, cooperated, did business. There was a clear demarcation. From that off, you were on the land. It's so important because this is the grammar we've lost when we're trying to formulate what it is that we're fighting and what it is we're actually trying to uphold. Because this is the clear, what I've learned in this study of law, it's if you are in any way, shape or form coming from a standpoint where you're asking or begging or pleading, you have not claimed your rights. You're begging for them, asking for them. That shows that you are already as a mindset, as a creature in the position of a slave. You have to take what is yours, not beg for it. So that's the mindset first you have to get rid of. And to do that, you have to work out who you are. And when you've worked out who you are, that's what you enforce in this world. That's the importance. And why a lot of people who have been into the law, the legal for a long time, don't grasp the fact that the common law is the common law and the rule book for that is the Bible. English common law isn't the common law. It's English common law from which the written realm is created. That's another misnomer that people are not understanding. Okay, if you're in the English realm, you're under title. To do it correctly, you've got to be with title without surname. That's your Christian title in the Christian constitutional realm of England. But what you want to be is a man holding that title. You don't want to be the title, you want to be a man holding title which you're operating in commerce. Okay? It's a big difference. And these are the basic structures you need to form within yourself before you can start to move with this system, opposing the Venetian system. The land bank was designed to serve as a tool to generate credit for manufacturing, internal improvements and centres of education across Britain, with a focus on long-term projects that generated real wealth. So that's manufacturing, you've got your cotton, yeah? Everything that Britain was as a manufacturing was created from land law, not the imperial law, which has come in and usurped it, yeah? Through legal title, through shenanigans of changing title, etc., the legalese system. So there's a clear demarcation in jurisdictions, yeah, and the two do not cross. You cannot enforce law by obeying and operating according to the legal. If you're operating law, that's what you're operating, and it cancels out the legal. And this is another point people don't recognise. You know, you can go into court with what you think is law, but you've gone in straight away as legal title. You're not going to be heard, especially if in the role of a defendant. It's so important that these concepts are grasped inside of you so that you can operate in this no matter what they throw at you. Harley's group also worked tirelessly to establish peace treaties with France in order to create a climate of stability needed for investments into the real economic sector to occur rather than leak monies into wars of death and destruction. So the landlords are not interested. The land laws and those that understand that jurisdiction don't want war. It does not serve wealth accumulation it doesn't. It will if you're doing a war economy. But you don't. So what we're saying is, you can see you don't need wars in order to have a strong economic background. And in many ways, this form of political economy served as a precursor to the latter system that arose under the guidance of Benjamin Franklin and Alexander Hamilton. Right, so the land system is actually what the American system under Franklin and Hamilton was actually based on. Although we know Hamilton was a complete fraud and Rothschild agent, and we know that Benjamin Franklin was also operating for the Whig system. So maybe they'd gone into America. That's how America understood it. Land law, English law. They wanted to be Englishmen. And they sent in 2 Whigs to present it as though they were playing on that rail, but they weren't really. That's the way they play this. Sadly, Harley's land bank was soon taken over by speculators and run into the ground as the Venetian party deep state continued to rise in power. When William died in 1702, Princess Anne became queen, and the cabal of Britain's Venetian party, then operating under the banner of the Whig junto, continued to exercise vast influence over affairs of state, driving the nation to ever deeper unpayable debts and war. As the late historian Graham Lowry brilliantly demonstrated in his book How the Nation Was Won, tides began to turn against the Venetian party Whigs by 1710 as Queen Anne had come to realise how she had been deceived by her close confidant, Sarah Churchill. Now, the reason why the Churchills are always involved in this is because the Marlboroughs, the Dukes of Marlboroughs, were the aristocratic line in England that succumbed to the Dutch usury system, allowing for the Civil War, allowing for the rise of Cromwell. Yeah? The Churchills, the Marlboroughs, the Dukes of Marlboroughs, they've been shits from before the Civil War time. It's very important that people grasp who the Churchills are and not what your map has been persuaded they are. Okay? So Sarah Churchill was a close confidant, and once she realised what a little shit and bitch that was, things started to change. Sarah Churchill was working with her husband John Churchill, aka Lord Marlborough, you see, okay, and they'd gained full control of the British armies, the standing armies that were created under James and then under Cromwell. Yeah, the new model army isn't what you think it was. It was giving the crown the ability to have a standing army to operate against the public, so it could service the will of the empire over the will of the land and the people and the biblical tradition. All right, so it's very important that people get this stuff. They'd also siphoned off millions of pounds from war profiteering and insider trading in the City of London, while gaining castles in the country more luxurious than those owned by the royal household itself. So, war. The Venetian system is what gave the empire its ability to get stuck in here, and the first bunch of assholes to jump on this before the Civil War, because they were operating for the Templars, the Presbyterian Whigs from Scotland, was the Dukes of Marlborough, the Churchills, Spencer Churchills. So, you know, Lady Diana, I've said this before, you know, I looked into everything that was available in relation to Diana being killed. I even watched it live that night it happened, because I'd just come back from promoting a club and this were across, so I stayed up all night. And there were a lot of reports in there that came instantly that you never saw again. So you know, once they're in your mind, you can't let it go. But at the end of what maybe could have been 10 years, I came to the conclusion that the only thing that I hadn't seen any evidence of whatsoever in the entire raft of information was that the fact that she was dead. There is no evidence that that woman died. None. So if you're looking from facts and law, you would have to conclude that there is no evidence to prove that Lady Diana died. And that is I don't care who you are, if you've spent the time looking into everything, you will not find any evidence that she's dead. It's as simple as that. Spencer Churchill, same bunch of rogues, yeah? And what's she done? Has she undermined the British? Did she undermine the British monarchical system? You bet she did. You bet your dollar she did. Now, Queen Anne drains the swamp. After 8 years of manipulation, the Queen had decided that she had had enough, and on September the 20th, 1710, she dissolved the Parliament and began draining the swamp under the guidance of Robert Harley, whom she promptly made Prime Minister, then called the First Minister, Chancellor of the Exchequer from 1710 to 11, and Lord High Treasurer from 1711 to 1714, before the Parliament was reconvened. The majority of John Churchill's Whig allies were forced to resign in disgrace, while Sarah Churchill was removed from her position as confidante, having been replaced with Abigail Masham, a key figure in Harley's Republican network of court insiders. Okay. As Lowry demonstrates, Harley's core conspirators centred in the Scribblerus Club, led by satirist and Irish statesman Jonathan Swift, who arrived in London weeks before the humanist counter-coup was unleashed and remained Harley's chief advisor and propagandist from August 1710 until October 1713. Other members of the Scribblerus Club included Queen Anne's physician John Arbuthnot, poet Alexander Pope, playwright John Gay, philosopher statesman Henry St. John and Thomas Parnell, to name a few. An important characteristic of all these figures was that they were cultural warriors of the highest level, whose poetry, plays and music was inspired by the intention to uplift the minds and morals of the people. Which is again what we need to do today. You're all running around thinking you have to obey, you have to ask permission. That's a degradation of your internal morality. Yeah? You've lost that. That's what needs to come back. You need to remember who you are as a power, as a force, as an existing being in this world. And if you want to then know what your rights and powers are, the Bible gives you unalienable rights, unalienable rights, rights that can't be interfered with unless you breach the laws of the biblical tradition. That's the common law, not English common law. You have to understand there are demarcations of jurisdiction. And this is why a lot of people that are in this seem to think they're opposing each other. You're not. You're in one jurisdiction, he's in another jurisdiction. Both of you should be listening to each other, because you'll learn about that jurisdiction and you'll learn about that jurisdiction. Instead of trying to mix the two, which doesn't happen. So again, you really need to get the basis of this is that you're dealing in different jurisdictions and they're sealed in the law, the statutes, the legislation. Okay, and the highest jurisdiction is of the biblical tradition because it's teaching you how to be a man in the image of a much higher force than we'll find on the land in your nation. Which is required. You have to have something above the level of man issuing out the orders, or there would be no limits on the insanity that man would go to in order to achieve his or her goals. Describing Harley's efforts to finally end the forever wars with France that ultimately resulted in the 1713 Treaty of Utrecht, and revive his 1696 plans for a national land bank, though this time with an intentional colonial infrastructure development orientation under a government-run South Sea Company to counteract both the Bank of England and also the British East India Company. So they'd seen there then that there was a problem with the methods of the East India Company parading itself around the world on a Genoese flag on the ships, on the navy. Yeah? The Red Fire Cross isn't an English flag. The boar was the English flag. The Red Cross, the Red Fire Cross, is Genovese. And the East India companies used our ensign across the world to present to the world that it was England. It's not England, okay? You know, these are falsehoods that you base your presumptions of reality on, and which is why you don't get to the root of the matter, and why a lot of your works will fail. You've come in from you're wrong at the foundation. It's going to be quite a while down the track of you trying before you realise there is a fault. But if you haven't recognised that it's at the foundation, you will not recognise that fault, because you'll be looking quite far down the path for your issue. Where is the problem? No. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's so important that you know who you are and what rights or freedoms you're exercising. Freedoms is the better word than rights. Swift wrote in his 1714 memoirs, Mr. Harley, to give credit to his administration, resolved upon two very important points. First, to secure unprovided debts of the nation, and secondly, to put an end to the war. Now, the Jesuits called themselves the company. That's the name they called themselves. The British power system calls itself the firm. Now, the East India companies are directly run by the Holy See through the Jesuits, with the centre in Switzerland, which is where the Templars went after the shenanigans as they were disbanded or attacked, as it were. Forget it. It's not what happened at all. But we're not getting to that at this point anyway. It's not worth it. Much like today's easily bewildered world, press agencies of 1710 were too often used by the forces of evil to make black appear white. Okay, exactly what the media are doing today. They've pushed in science that comes from Epstein's blackmail network. They took over the academy agenda in Britain and moved it in that way, so it's in the schools, it's in the universities. And they're throwing that out at you through the media as real, which is in direct opposition to actually medical science, medical facts, medical data. But because they're so powerful through the media and you're all addicted to the media, black appears to be white. And that's what's running this drive for this reset, shifting you from a bond slave into a lease revenue system and slavery in that method. So I'll sort like much like today's easily bewildered world, press agencies of 1710 were too often used by the force of evil to make black appear white, up appear down, and right to appear wrong. Slanders and mistruths were soon spread across the press of Harley's corrupting influence on the Queen, and the population was soon induced to riot, and even burn effigies of both the Queen and Harley in public squares. That's the power of the propaganda. Yeah, that's the power the propaganda has to change minds. But you're changing minds on ignorance. That's why they call it inciting the mob. Because the mob are known to have absolutely no foundation at all in anything other than what's self-service for them. Yeah, they don't have the capacity to see above their own needs and look for what's best for all and not necessarily what's best for you. The imperial mind is all about what's best for me. Yeah, the nation under what we could call the biblical tradition encouraged people to think a bit bigger than just themselves. You know, consider others, your neighbours, your nation, etc. In the face of this battle over information, Swift wrote The Art of Political Lying, which some historians have called the most influential pamphlet in British political history. Now, The Art of Political Lying, it says, in this biting essay, the satirist lays bare the techniques of mass manipulation, artfully stating, although the devil be the father of lies, he seems, like other great inventors, to have lost much of his reputation by the continual improvements that have been made upon him. Who first reduced lying into an art and adapted it to politics is not so clear from history, although I have made some diligent inquiries. I shall therefore consider it only according to the modern system, as it has been cultivated these 20 years past in the southern part of my own island. So that's the British Isles. The south. You notice, this is where you see the south divide, north divide. It's the south where they've made all these intrusions and cemented the Whig system, whereas the Northerners still tied to old Ireland, and the reason why William of Orange was thrust into Ireland to smash it up, it's the North and the Irish contingents that have kept the North in sync with the old system, the land, the law, the biblical common law, etc. That's why there's a north-south divide. It says, I shall therefore consider it only according to the modern system, as it has been cultivated these 20 years past in the southern part of our own island. The moderns have made great additions, applying this art to the gaining of power and preserving it, as well as revenging themselves after they have lost it. As the same instruments are made use of by animals to feed themselves when they are hungry, and to bite those that tread upon them, it can conquer kingdoms without fighting, and sometimes with the loss of the battle. It gives and resumes employments, can sink a mountain to a molehill, and raise a molehill to a mountain, hath presided for many years at committees of elections, can wash a blackamoor white, make a saint of an atheist, and a patriot of a profligate, can furnish foreign ministers with intelligence, and raise or let fall the credit of the nation. This goddess flies with a huge looking glass in her hands, to dazzle the crowd and make them see, according as she turns it, their ruin in their interest, and their interest in their ruin. Now notice how he uses the term goddess. This is where you get the idea come out of her, the whore of Babylon. It isn't the Vatican. It never has been. But through the Jesuits taking over the Vatican on behalf of the Holy See, as they have, in the same many centuries, they presented the Vatican, because the Vatican was the holder of the canon across the kingdoms it commissioned. Yeah, Napoleon wiped them out just after this, remember. That's what Napoleon was all about, was ridding Europe of the monarchies, the kingdoms born, operating under the Christian canon. The biblical tradition. Although weakened and bruised, the Venetian party in England and its French Jesuitical allies, yeah, did you get that? Made every attempt to thwart Harley's designs for peace with France from 1710 to 1713, beginning with a March the 8th, 1711 assassination attempt on Harley. Concerned over Harley's slow recovery and doubting the loyalty of Harley's physician, whom many suspected of being an asset of Marlborough, Swift published a widely read poem. To Mr. Harley's surgeon, on Britain, Europe's safety lies, and Britain's lost if Harley dies. Harley depends upon your skill, think what you save or what you will kill. So really, you know, you can show you here that this is the Venetians taking over Europe, but specifically France and England in this time period. And remember, the power base at this time is in Holland. Yeah, that's where the financial banking power was in these times, which is why Cromwell took his orders from Holland, etc. The users that came over came via Holland. Yeah, it's very important that we recognise this clear demarcation, because when you're looking at what is England, you've got to go biblical. You've got to go back to the canon. Now you've got to also recognise that Henry VIII, while undermining the nation, also brought in the Jesuits because he gave them Stonyhurst. That was a Jesuit powerhouse in the north of England from the 1500s under the Tudor watch. Now, if you can't see what I've just said to you there in that grammar, the reality of the situation, then because you are editing what nonsense has been pushed into your map. You're not dealing with the territory as it was, and therefore you're backing the wrong horse. Right? This is how this propaganda operates. It's clever stuff. If you're not a thinking human being, you'll fall for the propaganda. Luckily, Harvey recovered and peace negotiations recommended after several months. But soon it became clear that the Duke of Marlborough, still controlling the British armies and working closely with the Dutch mercenaries, was not going to let peace win without a fight. See, this is what Cromwell achieved. He created the new model army and it got took up and run by the Dukes of Marlborough against England. This is what's missed by people because they're not thinking. the running on propaganda that they've took on since they were a kid. I sucked into the propaganda as a kid. You know, one of my grandfathers, the one who actually didn't go into the war, believe it or not. All those, my ancestors, all those that I met that had gone to war, they didn't big up the British Empire. They were ashamed. But my grandfather that didn't go to war, because he hadn't seen the nuts and bolts of it, he still believed in the nonsense, you know, and I took that on as a youngster. I have to say it was traumatic for me when I started to study the reality of this nation as opposed to the shit and bullshit that that's been propagated in our minds. Let me just explain this, and this is where you can get the gist of the difference, and that we are under the empire, the British Empire, yeah? And we are a colony. England, Scotland, Ireland, we're all colonies of it. And here now, they are removing us from a colonial position into absolutism under this new lease revenue no-hide system. Working closely with the Dutch mercenaries, we're not going to let peace win without a fight, announced that he would soon take Paris and commenced a vicious attack on the French town of Beauchesne, causing the Queen to write to Harley saying, "The Duke of Marlborough shows plainer than ever by his new project his unwillingness for peace, but I hope our negotiations will succeed and there it will not be in his power to prevent it." Here Swift's razor-sharp pen was again deployed to expose the military-industrial complex of London, where he published the immensely popular book Conduct of the Allies on November the 23rd, 1712. In this short work, Swift wrote, "We are destroying many thousands' lives, exhausting our sustenance, not for our own interest, which would be but common prudence, not for a thing indifferent, which would be sufficient folly, but perhaps to our own destruction, which is perfect madness." Exactly what you're doing now when you're obeying this propaganda coming through the TV and the media. If you follow that, it is the madness, and it's going to lead to nation destruction, your sovereignty destruction. You know, Parliament's claimed sovereignty. It can't. The only sovereign office in this land is the office of monarch, and the sovereignty is borrowed from the people. This is how the old canon Christian kingdoms operated. Yeah, that's where the power was given to the people. This isn't. This is complete removal of all the sovereignty, all the freedoms afforded to you under biblical tradition as you move into this Venetian warmongering insanity. Swift attacked the carnage caused by that set of people who were called the moneyed men, such as had raised vast sums by trading with stocks and funds and lending upon great interest and premiums, whose perpetual harvest is war. Can you see what I'm saying there? So there's different ways of raising money. They wanted a land bank that could give the credit to build things in the nation, schools, infrastructure, manufacturing bases. This Venetian system raises its money through war and lending it to combative nations for weaponry, etc. But it gives then the lenders the ability to decide who's going to win the war because they're controlling weaponry going into each nation. So there's two obvious, clear demarcations. There's earn your money through war, which is death, murder, completely in opposition to the biblical tradition, as opposed to what was known as the landed system, which accumulates credit in a different way in order you can build an infrastructure, and that way it stays within. So privatising our energy and our infrastructure in general has handed over the structure to the nations over to this warmongering system. And of course today the Muslims have been co-opted into this a long time ago through the Arabs, through the Sunni version of Islam. Citing the £50 million of unpayable debt incurred by Marlborough's war with France, Swift called out the conspirators on all sides to go on with those measures, which must perpetuate the war. £50 million of unpayable debts. This is what the Dukes of Marlborough, the Churchills, were doing. in France to force the British government to borrow off the Bank of England. That's what this were all about. Because they told them, sod you, no, we're not borrowing anything at them rates. Same were going on in France. They had to formulate this war to get both the British government and the French government to borrow off it and put the Bank of England into a position of power. Yeah? You see how that works? This immensely popular pamphlet went through 3 editions in only 3 months and invoked such indignation among the population that the heroic image of the Duke of Marlborough portrayed by the media was torn to shreds, and vast support was won for the peace process. In her December the 6th speech opening of Parliament, Queen Anne stated, "I am glad that I can now tell you that notwithstanding the arts of those who delight in war, both place and time are appointed for opening the treaty of a general peace." Not only did peace negotiations finally move forward, but the Queen convened a House inquiry into Marlborough's siphoning off funds and war profiteering, resulting in his being stripped of all offices on December the 29th, 1712, and replaced with Harley's longtime ally, James Butler, 2nd Duke of Ormond, as commander of the army. So she managed to remove the armies into her own hands. They did actually achieve this. But then when your opposition side is prepared to murder and do everything opposite to the biblical tradition, it makes life difficult, does it not? Which is why I can see how the Jesuits have changed our idea of Christendom to prevent you from operating war correctly. You know, natural law, it's a natural instinct to protect yourself, to protect your family, to protect your wider family, which is nation. It's a natural instinct. That's a natural law. The way that the Jesuits have moved Christianity in its doctrinal theology has actually decapitated the Christian nations from actually battling against these idiots. It's clever stuff, and that is from the Jesuits' installation under the Tudors. The next 18 months were some of the most intense in British political history, with continuous battles waged to sabotage the peace process from oligarchical representatives within both England and France itself. Much like today, these oligarchs and upper-level managers were always more interested in keeping the world at constant war, underdeveloped and stupid in order to maintain a global hegemony above nations. While the Duke of Ormond maintained a neutral position in France during the long drawn-out peace negotiations, dark things were occurring in France. The Venetian party strikes back. From the first week of the treaty negotiations throughout the subsequent 2 months, over 4 consecutive heirs to the French throne died of the same mysterious symptoms, leaving a Duke of Orleans and a Jesuitical cabal who controlled the ailing King Louis XIV in a strategic position of power never before seen in French history. So can you see that with the installation of the Bank of England and the respective one in France, the Venetians managed to take over? Bearing in mind, people, from these moves did they have enough power to undermine France completely with the revolution. Yeah. In England, it was the installation of the Rothschilds. Yeah, can you see how this game is moving? So the 1700s, after the reset of 1666, was huge. And this is the battles that we're playing out. And it's a clear demarcation between the Christian kingdoms, which incorporates nation, and all the freedoms afforded by the Bible for the biblical man, against this imperial warmongering set of bastards who are only interested in blood, death, war, debt. That's how they achieve their huge amounts of credit and finance to move their system forward at the expense of the systems on the land, which is why they've had to move everything that we built here over to the east. They don't want it to disappear, what we've created, but they just need to own it or control it is probably the better option, because as everything moves into trusts, you control the assets in the trust, but you don't actually own them. And this is what's happening with the lease revenue system now. You know, they're taking all the property off you and then leasing it you back. When Harley's lead peace negotiator, the Duke of Hamilton, was deployed to take his new position as ambassador to France, a duel was arranged, resulting in Hamilton's successful killing of one of Marlborough's chief henchmen, General Macartney. However, when Macartney's second then stabbed an unsuspecting Hamilton to death minutes later, Marlborough quickly demonstrated his guilt as he promptly packed his bags and fled to Holland, not to return until August the 1st, 1714, the day Queen Anne died. Alright, so Queen Anne needs bigging up here. She's one of our real English monarch heroes. Queen Anne, alright? So she's died 1714. Game over, innit? Upon the Queen's death, most likely due to poisoning under the hand of her new physician Daniel Malthus, great-grandfather of that twisted prick Thomas Malthus, who's the high priest of depopulation, which you're all suffering now by consent with your vaccine and your test and trace because you're stupid. If you're wearing a mask, you're stupid. If you're going to take the vaccination, you're stupid. I no longer have an interest in your world, your life, your ups and downs and that way. It's a pointless exercise for somebody like me to give a shit. It's pointless. The only downside to that is a lot of potential good people who could work to oppose this system as it moves itself in are going to be dead. Under so much medication, it'd be a job to watch the TV. Upon the Queen's death, most likely due to poison under the hand of her new physician Daniel Malthus, great-grandfather of the misanthrope high priest of depopulation Thomas Malthus, the Venetian party took full control of Britain and never let it go again. So 1714 is a terrible day for England. Alright? And its people. And its everything. With the ascension of George Ludwig, this is the shag faggots from Germany, the Venetians, the Coburgs. The Coburgs are the power in the Venetian Party of the North, or the new Venetian Party of the North, which we are now under. With the ascension of George Ludwig to the throne in 1714, the Satanic Hellfire Club rose in prominence. Okay, there were always the secret clubs going on here. Marlborough was reinstated to all of his former positions. That's the head of the fucking armies. So back everything goes into the hands of the Venetians, the warmongers. Marlborough was reinstated to all of his former positions. Robert Harley was imprisoned in the Tower of London. And the economy was driven into a new epoch of colonial exploitation. So as I said before, what was set up from England as trading blocks wasn't what it became once this bunch of shenanigans got hold of it. Bearing in mind, the East India Companies were not English. They just had their bases in the city. Jesuits, Templars, Persians, Noahides, British Israelites. Not English, British. Yeah? Holy See, freak show, money men. Wars were unleashed abroad as the South Sea Company was turned into a speculative bubble. So the South Sea Company was set up in opposition to the East India Companies, and it weren't operating that kind of garbage. But that then, as soon as the Whigs took over, that then became another arm of the East India Company. And it was turned into a speculative bubble that soon burst by 1720, tearing down the British people while enriching the City of London insiders in the same way that Wall Street cleaned up bankrupt assets for pennies on the dollar in 1929. So, and I've said this a lot, they never change tack in the system. What they do is prevent the masses from understanding the system. And that they do through controlling education. And we're in the same position today. They've removed the grammar in relation to us fully understanding our predicament. What it is that we should be protecting and what it is we should be fighting. And that's been role reversed, because that we're supposed to be fighting and presenting themselves as that we should be protecting. So ignorance is the key to this success or failure on behalf of the imperial madness. Alright, if you don't have the grammar, you will not see the deception. And you'll just go along with whatever it is that's going on based on satisfying your own fear. Because you're no longer a man, you're a human and fast becoming slave. You know, you're there now. You know, you're walking around with mask on like it's a part of your attire, and you don't feel comfortable without it. Something's seriously wrong with you. Do you understand that? Something seriously wrong has happened inside of you, so that you're now a walking, talking puppet. Less of the talk, of course, because you've got the muzzle on. Anyway, let's not turn this into a nonsense. Let's just keep it as it is. Under the control of the British Africa Company and Board of Trade, the poisonous slave trade came to dominate the 18th century, and a newly enforced era of divide to conquer tactics was unleashed in full force. So the slave trade came in with the Venetians. The Jewish, their law is Jewish. That's what they take it of, Talmudic. Alright, so this is where it came. British Africa Company. This is on par with the East India Companies. It's the same thing, company. The company, Jesuits. Because that's what they call themselves. Writing years later of the events of 1710 to 1714, after he had long returned to a new base of operations in Dublin, Jonathan Swift wrote a poem reminiscent of the period of hope and tragedy. And oh, how short are human schemes. Here ended all our golden dreams. What St. John's skill in state affairs, what Ormond's valour, Oxford curs, to save their sinking country lent, was all destroyed by one event. Too soon that precious life was ended, on which alone our weal depended. And that is Queen Anne. Queen Anne. This woman were a good one. You know? Do you ever hear about her? No, all you ever see when you're being taught history is the garbage bloodlines, the freak show, the unclean. And here we are today. So, on that note, I will say, till the next time.